If the internet disappeared tomorrow morning, most people wouldn't panic immediately. They would reach for their phones the same way they always do. Half awake. Automatic. Someone would try to refresh a feed while brushing their teeth. Someone else would reopen the same app 3 times before realizing it wasn't loading. At first, it would feel small, annoying, temporary. People trust interruptions when interruptions have happened before. A man would sit inside his car outside a coffee shop, waiting for his banking app to reconnect. A teenager would restart her phone because TikTok stopped loading. Employees would stare at frozen login screens, thinking the office Wi-Fi was broken. Nobody would think civilization itself had just changed, because collapse never feels like collapse in the first few minutes. It feels like inconvenience. The frightening part is not how much entertainment would disappear. It's how many people would suddenly lose access to memory, identity, navigation, communication, money, work, routine, reassurance, and proof that other people still exist. Most modern lives are no longer stored physically. They're scattered across servers nobody has ever seen. And once those servers go dark, people don't just lose information. They lose continuity. Number 1. If the internet disappeared tomorrow, people would not only lose access to the world, they would lose access to the version of themselves the world was constantly reflecting back to them. This is total digital integration. Technology stopped functioning as a tool and became part of psychological structure itself. Integrated systems reshape behavior. Reshaped behavior rewires expectation. Cause leads to effect. Separation feels like identity damage rather than inconvenience. And modern civilization discovers how much of itself already exists outside the human mind. For years, people believed they were simply using the internet. But dependency rarely feels like dependency while the system remains stable. A person stores photographs online because it feels easier. Then, memories become digital. A person works remotely because it feels efficient. Then survival becomes digital. A person socializes through platforms because it feels normal. Then, emotional reassurance becomes digital. None of these changes feel catastrophic individually. That is why they spread so easily. Modern society did not collapse into dependence through force. It drifted there through convenience. And convenience is difficult to resist because the nervous system rewards reduced friction automatically. The frightening truth is not that the internet became powerful. It is that human beings reorganized themselves around its existence so completely that many people no longer know where the system ends and they begin. If the internet vanished tomorrow, the immediate damage would not be technological. It would be psychological disorientation on a civilizational scale. People would still have homes, roads, food, bodies, voices, but the invisible structure coordinating modern life would suddenly disappear. And without that structure, millions of people would experience the same terrifying realization at once. The world did not become digital. We did. Number 2. A woman realizes she no longer knows who she is without constant digital visibility. This is identity reflection dependency. Self-perception became partially constructed through audience feedback. Feedback reinforces identity continuity. Continuous reinforcement creates attachment. Cause leads to effect. Invisibility destabilizes self-definition. And silence begins erasing certainty. Modern identity is no longer entirely internal. People measure themselves through reactions. Views, messages, likes, replies, notifications, presence indicators. Tiny signals, repeated thousands of times, slowly become emotional mirrors. A creator waking up without audience access would feel psychological withdrawal before financial fear even appears. Teenagers raised online would suddenly lose the systems that reflected social existence back toward them daily. Influencers whose lives revolve around visibility would experience disappearance as emotional suffocation. Not because they are weak, because the human brain adapts to reflected identity extremely quickly. For years, Platforms quietly trained people to associate visibility with relevance. If nobody reacts, the nervous system starts questioning whether connection still exists. And once connection feels uncertain, identity starts destabilizing with it. The internet did not create insecurity from nothing. It industrialized comparison, quantified attention, and turned visibility into emotional oxygen. Number 3. A man notices that nobody knows which information is true anymore once digital verification disappears. This is centralized reality dependence. Shared truth became infrastructure-based. Infrastructure organizes consensus. Consensus stabilizes perception. Cause leads to effect. Uncertainty expands when verification collapses, and confusion spreads faster than facts. Modern society relies on instant confirmation constantly. Search engines settle arguments. News feeds update events. Maps confirm locations. Platforms validate identity. Algorithms prioritize visibility. People stopped realizing how often they outsource certainty itself. Without internet systems, rumors regain power immediately. Someone would hear that power grids are failing in another city. Another person would claim banks are permanently frozen. Videos stored offline would circulate without timestamps or verification. Fear would distort memory. Memory would distort communication. And once enough uncertainty accumulates, people stop trusting each other's perception. The internet did not merely distribute information, it synchronized reality. Even flawed systems provided temporal coordination, everyone reacting to the same stream at the same time. Without that synchronization, society fragments into isolated interpretations again. Different neighborhoods would believe different things. Different groups would create different explanations. Different fears would produce different behaviors. And once shared reality weakens, social tension increases automatically. Because uncertainty makes strangers feel dangerous. Number 4. People would slowly realize how much emotional regulation the internet was performing for them every day. This is externalized emotional stabilization. Stimulation replaced internal processing. Continuous distraction suppresses unresolved emotion. Suppression creates dependency. Cause leads to effect. Silence becomes psychologically threatening, and stillness starts feeling unsafe. Most people no longer use the internet only for information. They use it for interruption. A stressful moment appears. The phone comes out. An awkward silence appears. The screen lights up. A painful thought surfaces. Content arrives immediately. The internet became a frictionless escape route from unprocessed emotion, not because people consciously designed it that way, because the nervous system naturally repeats behaviors that reduce discomfort quickly. Without digital interruption, unresolved feelings begin resurfacing all at once. Loneliness, regret, fear, boredom, identity confusion. Things that constant stimulation kept temporarily buried. A teenager sitting alone in a bedroom would suddenly experience silence without algorithmic relief for the first time in years. Workers commuting home would stare through train windows instead of downward at screens. Couples at dinner would discover how much conversation had already disappeared long before the internet did. The frightening realization would not be, we lost entertainment. It would be, we forgot how to sit with ourselves. And many people would discover that distraction had become emotional survival. Number 5. A woman opens her laptop for work and realizes her entire career exists online. This is digital identity consolidation. Professional existence became dependent on network access. Dependency increases vulnerability. Vulnerability destabilizes continuity. Cause produces effect. Economic identity weakens when infrastructure disappears. And modern work begins dissolving immediately. For millions of people, labor no longer exists in physical spaces. It exists inside platforms. Cloud documents, remote dashboards, video meetings, digital payment systems, online clients, algorithmic visibility. A man working freelance would suddenly lose access to every active project. Small businesses dependent on online orders would stop functioning within hours. Remote employees would discover that entire companies cannot operate without authentication servers. Creators whose audiences exist entirely on social media would vanish economically overnight, not gradually, instantly. The psychological damage would go beyond lost income. People derive identity from usefulness, and modern systems increasingly measure usefulness through digital participation. When participation disappears, many people would experience something deeper than financial fear: existential interruption. The terrifying question becomes, if nobody can access my work, does my work still exist? For years, society moved toward frictionless digital life because friction felt inefficient. But friction also created resilience: paper records, physical skills, local systems, face-to-face networks. Modern optimization removed many of those backups quietly, and optimized systems often function perfectly until the moment they fail completely. Where do you currently stand? Which stage are you currently at? Number 6. A man walks into a supermarket and sees people buying far more than they normally would. This is scarcity contagion. Fear spreads faster than information. Uncertainty increases survival behavior. Survival behavior becomes social imitation. Cause leads to effect. Visible panic creates additional panic. And crowds amplify instinct automatically. Most people believe they make independent decisions during emergencies, but human beings read emotional cues from groups before they evaluate evidence themselves. A woman grabbing 10 bottles of water communicates danger faster than any official statement ever could. A nearly empty shelf changes the emotional atmosphere of an entire building within seconds. People who originally entered calmly begin accelerating their movements after watching others rush. Because urgency is contagious, especially when systems no longer provide reassurance. The internet quietly stabilized modern psychology by creating the illusion of constant situational awareness. News updates, social feeds, live notifications, trending topics. Together, they formed a continuous stream of orientation signals. Even when information was inaccurate, the nervous system still felt informed. Without that stream, uncertainty expands rapidly, and the human brain hates informational voids. Inside stores, people would not only buy food, they would buy control. Batteries, medicine, cash, fuel, anything physical enough to restore the feeling that tomorrow can still be predicted. Because during collapse, objects become emotional anchors, and once fear becomes visible in public spaces, civilization starts feeling thinner than people expected. Number 7. A woman tries to contact someone important and realizes she no longer remembers a single phone number. This is contact externalization. Human connection shifted from memory into infrastructure. Infrastructure centralizes access. Centralization increases fragility. Cause leads to effect. Relationships become unreachable when systems disappear. And silence spreads faster than panic. There was a time when remembering phone numbers felt normal. Families memorized addresses. Children knew emergency contacts by heart. Important people occupied permanent space inside memory because communication required retention. Then, smartphones absorbed the burden. People stopped memorizing gradually without noticing anything meaningful was being lost. Because convenience rarely feels dangerous while it works. But the moment networks disappear, emotional dependence becomes visible. Parents would not know how to contact children outside school. Couples separated across cities would have no alternative communication method. Businesses would lose employees inside disconnected transportation systems. Elderly relatives living alone would become unreachable immediately. The frightening part would not be technological failure. It would be the speed at which emotional certainty collapses once instant communication disappears. Modern people are psychologically reassured by constant reachability. Even when no message arrives, the possibility itself feels stabilizing. And once that possibility vanishes, distance suddenly feels real again. Number 8. A man realizes he no longer knows how to reach places without digital maps. This is navigational outsourcing. Spatial memory weakens when direction becomes automated. Automation removes environmental engagement. Reduced engagement decreases retention. Cause leads to effect. Orientation collapses once assistance disappears, and dependence reveals itself during movement. For years, people stopped building internal maps of the world around them. They followed blue lines instead. Streets became instructions rather than places. Cities became sequences of turns generated by systems people never questioned. The brain adapted efficiently. Why memorize routes when technology remembers perfectly? But navigation was never just about arrival. It was about relationship to physical reality. A delivery driver would sit inside traffic, unable to reroute after road closures. Travelers stranded in unfamiliar cities would suddenly realize they never learned the names of the streets around them. Entire populations raised on instant navigation would experience disorientation in places they had lived for years. Not because the world changed, because their relationship to the world already had. Without digital guidance, movement becomes slower. Slower movement increases stress. Stress reduces decision confidence. Cause continues into effect until ordinary travel begins producing anxiety. And once anxiety enters navigation, the world itself starts feeling larger. Number 9. A teenager keeps checking social media even after everyone already knows it no longer works. This is behavioral loop persistence. The action survives after the reward disappears. Repeated stimulation conditions anticipation. Anticipation creates reflex. Cause produces effect. The body continues seeking input automatically, and the loop keeps firing long after the system dies. People often imagine addiction as emotional desperation, but most digital dependency is mechanical before it becomes emotional. Thumb movement, screen refresh, notification check, open app, close app, open app again. The sequence repeats so often that awareness stops participating. A person waiting in line at a grocery store would still reach into their pocket during silence. Someone eating lunch alone would instinctively unlock their phone every few minutes, even after hours without connection. Workers sitting in offices would continue reopening inboxes that no longer update. Not because they expected success, because routine survived reality. The human nervous system prefers familiar movement over empty stillness, and modern silence has become unfamiliar. For many people, the internet did not just provide information, it removed psychological emptiness. Without constant input, something uncomfortable begins surfacing underneath the noise. Unstructured thought. And many people have not sat alone with their own thoughts in years. Number 10. A woman tries to log into her bank account and realizes she no longer remembers her own passwords. This is outsourced memory dependency. Repetition moved from the brain into systems. Systems reduce cognitive effort. Reduced effort becomes habit. Cause leads to effect. Recall weakens when retrieval becomes automatic. And modern life quietly adapts around that weakness. For years, remembering stopped being necessary. Phones remembered birthdays. Browsers remembered passwords. Maps remembered directions. Cloud storage remembered photographs people once promised themselves they would never lose. The brain noticed the burden disappearing and accepted the trade immediately. Because efficiency feels harmless when nothing goes wrong. But the moment systems vanish, the human nervous system discovers how much of itself it already handed away. Not dramatically. Gradually, a man standing at an ATM would realize he cannot access his money. Not because the money disappeared, but because the pathway to it no longer exists. Employees would not know how to verify payroll manually. Hospitals would struggle to retrieve digital records. Parents would realize every family photo from the last 10 years only existed online. The frightening realization would not be, the internet is gone. It would be, I don't know how to function without it, and the panic would begin, quietly. The internet did more than connect people. It absorbed memory, attention, identity, orientation, work, comfort, routine, and emotional regulation slowly enough that most people never notice the transfer happening. That is how large systems integrate into human behavior. Not through force, but through convenience, repeated thousands of times. Most people believe collapse feels explosive. In reality, collapse often begins with ordinary actions suddenly failing. A login screen that never loads, a message that never sends, a map that never appears, a silence that no longer breaks. And once those small failures accumulate, people begin realizing how much of modern life only existed because invisible systems kept simulating continuity in the background. The frightening part is not that humanity relies on technology. Human beings have always relied on tools. The frightening part is that modern people increasingly rely on systems they cannot repair, cannot fully understand, and cannot emotionally function without. Because when dependence becomes invisible, loss stops feeling external. It feels personal. And the moment a civilization cannot separate itself from its own systems anymore, even temporary silence starts feeling like the end of the world.